These sleeves are so on brand for me, they should be illegal. Works pretty well. I need a life. Here at Fantastical Follies, pockets are never optional. It's time to get creepy and spooky and altogether kooky. That's right, my friends. Today we're doing Morticia Addams in the Italian Renaissance. Why? Because you literally asked me to. Black was actually quite a popular color in the Italian Renaissance. Catherine de' Medici in particular wears a lot of black in her portraits, so I think it's totally appropriate to do Morticia in this time period. I got so excited when y'all picked this character. I love Morticia, I always have, especially Anjelica Huston's version. She brings so much poise and humor to the role, especially the humor.
We've told Wednesday, college first.
Of course. And while I certainly don't have the poise or elegance that Anjelica Huston has, hopefully I can still do this character justice. I'm really looking forward to recreating that rose cutting scene for the reveal. Also, the finished costume is totally giving Baroness Rodmilla de Ghent as well, and I'm so here for it. By the way, there is a special surprise for everyone who makes it to the end of the video. Hopefully, I haven't made a hash of it. Time to get kooky, y'all. Morticia rocks an all-black look, so I grabbed this cotton out of my stash. But they liked patterns in the Renaissance, so we'll be block printing it to make it a little more period accurate. To do that, we needed to first assemble the skirt. With that said, I'm not too worried about historical adequacy in this project. This is not my era, and I know very little about it at this point. This is sort of a test run or wearable mock-up for this particular pattern, because I plan to do something more elaborate and more HA sometime in the distant future. Iron out the seam allowances at the top opening and roll them in just like you would the pocket slits on an 18th century petticoat. Speaking of pocket slits, see these little X's on the sides? The pattern gives the optional instruction to add pocket slits in the skirt so you can, comma quote, reach items worn under the skirt like your finger trap. Optional? Here at Fantastical Follies, pockets are never optional. So when you pin your front side gore, make sure you leave it open between the two X's to give you access to your pockets. And your party favors that double as torture devices. Again, roll the seam allowances back when you press. All right, let's block print this baby. I apologize for all the fuzz and stuff. It's black fabric. There's nothing I can do about it. It's on the floor. It's gonna happen. Sorry, y'all. This is stage 1 I have already done. Now we're gonna start stage 2. As you can see, I just drew a grid and stamped. Now the pattern is a little bit different depending on how much paint I had. That's okay. I'm all right with it looking a little bit hand done. These are all in one line, so we're gonna do another line in the center that is off kilter. So I decided that instead of drawing the line all the way across, I would just make the mark at the center so I knew where my stamp would go. Now, I did learn that they look better when you first start than they do when you last start. So instead of going from one side to the other, I'm gonna start in the center and move my way out. Here's the stamp I'm using. I've linked to it in the description. And we'll be using Jacquard's Lumiere fabric paint for this because I had it on hand. You want something completely flat to pour your paint into. Okay, so I learned that you don't want to do too much paint at once. All right, just do a little bit. That's plenty. And then I like to just kind of swirl it and thin it out before I place my stamp down. Okay. Okay. There we go. Block printing is not difficult, but it is time consuming. I found it's very worth the effort to draw yourself some guidelines first. You want to get a thin but even spread of paint on your stamp, and when you put it down, make sure you apply pressure to the entire stamp and not just in the center. Also, highly recommend doing some practice stamps on a scrap piece of fabric first to get a feel for how your stamp behaves. And make a point to wash off the paint periodically from your stamp. That's why my stamps were looking so thick and wonky toward the end of the project. First try on. This is surprisingly okay in the front. Getting a little bit of wrinkling here, but I think that's going to disappear when we fold up the seam allowance. However, back of the bodice is quite long for me, and she did say in the instructions that this is common on very curvy people, so we are going to have to take this up. I'm just going to let this fold up to where it wants to be there, and then I'll You'd think with the amount of pins I find on the floor, there would be one handy. What did I tell you? So I'm just gonna pin this here, comme ça, and I'll adjust from there. Am I getting kind of scary flashback vibes from the mock-up of my first Angelica gown? If all of my patterns fit this well after the first fitting, my life would be so much easier. Yes, I am. Am I trusting that this is going to be fine when I put it on my body? No, I'm not. I think that did the trick, y'all. I ended up tucking the front as well as the back because the side seams weren't the same size. So that looks like it worked. I think we're good. I should have known better. Here's the front pieces cut out. And because we shortened the bodice front by 2 inches, we also need to shorten the stiffening piece. Whoa, NEM! The front of the bodice is stiffened in part with 2 layers of cotton batting. That's 2 layers on each side. Highly recommend purchasing the digital version of this pattern, which is the Italian ladies wardrobe from Margot Anderson. Whoops, I cut the wrong line. It has like a gazillion different options. It is truly a wardrobe pattern. But on my paper pattern, all 5 bodice options are on 1 piece, which makes it really confusing. Interlining is flatlined to the lining. I wonder what this spud colored lining fabric is for. The pattern suggests adding some boning as these styles like to wrinkle without it. This is not period accurate, but I'm large in the chest, so I'm here for it. The lines aren't included in the pattern, only a suggested layout, so I'm freestyling it. If you'd like to learn how to do this, I have a whole video about redrawing boning channels you should totally check out. Most of the lines are straight up and down in line with the center front, but as you get closer to the side seam, they begin to radiate outward. With a different colored friction pen, I then drew lines between each boning channel. These are going to be our zigzag stitch lines, which are taking the place of pad stitching, which would be the period way to do it. I love that she gives some modern time-saving methods in this pattern. Next, we need to grade the padding so the seam allowances aren't chunky like Campbell's soup. We'll take a 1/2 inch off of 1 set of the batting pieces on every side. Now make a sandwich. This little strip of fabric is to face the center front edge so the batting doesn't show when laced. Speaking of lacing, let's do that. Renaissance bodices are ladder laced. You can do it with rings, but the pattern suggests using grosgrain ribbon, which is sturdier. I plan to do a dedicated video for you with fabric that's not all black that goes in depth into how to ladder lace a bodice, so don't forget to subscribe and hit the little notification button if you're interested in seeing that. I find this rather tedious, but some may find it more enjoyable than setting in grommets or hand sewing eyelets. Which do you prefer? I'm definitely an eyelet gal. All right, witches, let's bone. Meanwhile, I finally finished block printing the skirt. And in my insanity, I discovered a new and best way to get rid of those pesky tailor's chalk lines. Works pretty well. Side note, I started doing this in front of my sliding glass door and thought better of it because I didn't want the construction workers outside to see. So I moved to the other room and the camera because y'all get me. The bodice fronts and backs are block printed and bedazzled, and we're ready for assembly. But oops, Jackie, you forgot to cut the back lining. All right, we're getting there. I do need to make a couple of changes, but let me do a little spin for you first. All right, so the first thing is this is still popping up. I think once we fix the seam allowances, it'll be okay. I am, however, going to go ahead and put a strip of boning just in the back here to give it a little bit more stability. Not historically accurate, but I think it'll help. And I think I'm going to move this to this part of the strap. I think that'll give me a little bit more support. I don't fully feel supported in this. I'm gonna go ahead and add 2 strips of boning in the front. The pattern only calls for 1 right on the edge, but I'm gonna go ahead and stick another one here just for extra support because we are buckling a little bit and I want to feel comfortable wearing this. I also decided to add some more boning throughout the bodice front. I took it in a little on the sides as well. I did have to piece my center back lining. For the boning channel, I added another small strip of fabric over the center. Here's the sewn boning channel in the center front. This then gets folded backwards as reinforcement behind the lacing. Wait a minute. No, my dumbass decided this was the right way to do it. Fun fact, the ribbon was sewn on the wrong side of the bodice. Next, add the straps, which you want to sew to the bodice back, but not yet to the front, at least permanently. There's also some work that needs to be done on the baragoni or sleeve puff. I've run out of paint, so I decided to machine embroider and embellish these with pearls instead. I set about drawing diagonal lines crisscrossed over the sleeve puffs. It's at this point I realize you can see my reflection in the camera. I need a life. And then the other way. I'm using a long straight stitch for this to mimic a hand-sewn back stitch. It was at this point on November 2nd that I realized I was not going to get this dress done in time for my Renaissance event the next day. And while I was at said event, I was given the infamous ivory and gray striped silk, which put me into bustle sewing overdrive in preparation for Dickens on the Strand. So Morticia took a nap in her coffin for about a month or so. We are 6 days out from Dickens and I'm finally ready to sew again. Yesterday I finally fixed the ribbon for the lacing, tried it on, and made just a couple of changes. Let me show you what I've done. So the ribbon is now sewn to the lining side, not the interfacing side. It felt very unsupportive, so I went ahead and I added 3 pieces of much larger, much stronger boning in the center front on each side. The back was wrinkling really bad, so I tacked it up because I realized that this is supposed to meet here, I think. So when I did that, I noticed that there was a big difference between the length of the bodice back and the length of the bodice front. I'm gonna go ahead and cut that down. Next, I sewed a seam at the bottom of the bodice at the edge of the boning channels before finishing off all the edges of my boning. Now to assemble the sleeve puffs. Here's the puff underside, and here's my completed embroidered and embellished puff. I'm doing this wrong. These pieces should be placed wrong sides together so there's a seam to attach to the arm side. After running 2 sets of basting stitches along each edge and the center, pull up each long edge to fit the base and pin. Sew on the long edges. Then pull the basting in the center to create the double puff, then stitch down to the base on the machine. Time to stuff the puff. Use a chopstick if you're opting for the double puff, or just your hands if you are doing the single. I'm opting to leave the underarm portion of the sleeves not poofy. Pin the fashion fabric to the lining at the center front. Since I'm trying to make the bodice somewhat reversible, at least for the time being, I'm opting to take a nod to the 18th century. Pin the inner lining to the bodice back, wrong sides together, and sew. Iron the seams in toward the center front. And turn in the raw edge along the side seam and pin. I'll then prick stitch this down once the center front is sewn. For all intents and purposes, the bodice is completely assembled except for the straps. These guys go on after we've gotten the skirt on. So we closed up all of the boning channels. I hemmed the top except for where the sleeve is gonna go. On the front, I laid in some velvet ribbon along the edges to give it a little bit more of a polished look. So I guess we'll get the skirt on. So how is this supposed to work? I don't know. I'm opting to do the gathered option because it's faster. I messed up on the skirt. It was supposed to be sloped downward and I thought I could get away with it, but that looks pretty ugly. I'm gonna have to fix that. Also, there are 165 pages of instructions for this pattern, and not on a single page is the actual back of the sottana shown. This is one of the issues that I have with a lot of these small independent pattern companies. There's a lot of assuming going on, and you know what happens when you assume. Here's where it looks like right now. The back flap is loose. I'm gonna just tack it down kind of the way that I did with my Angelica gown if you watched that video. Was that historically accurate to how they were doing it? I have no freaking idea. If you know, please drop into the comments and tell me because I can fix it if I know how to fix it. But right now I don't. So I'm just gonna do the later period construction because that's what I'm comfortable with. Yeah. All right, let's go fix these problems. This, my friends, is the quick and dirty method. When I say that I am burnt out from the bustle fiasco, I am not exaggerating. This is going to be my last project for the year, and I'm going to take a break from sewing completely for the 2 weeks that I visit my family for the holidays. I drew a line where I needed the new edge to be, then ran some gathering stitches along it. Then I just pulled them up and pinned. I'm not gonna cut this or anything, just in case I need to fix it later. These sleeves are so on brand for me, they should be illegal. I love them. That's the good news. The bad news is I used snaps to snap these on, and unfortunately, they keep popping every time I move. So my idea to make these completely removable is not a failure, but it's not gonna work out the way I planned. However, I think I can still work with it. I'm just going to hand baste the sleeves in. To do that, we need to set in the loops for the longer sleeves first. Also good news, that's all that's left to do except for to finish some of the trim. I put a hook and eye here in the center front to keep it closed. I do think I need thicker lacing. I think that this 1/4 inch grosgrain ribbon is just not cutting it. So I think I'm gonna try and shove my 1 inch cotton twill tape in there instead. Wish me luck on that. And I also think I'm going to go ahead and sew some batting underneath this to get the little spring. I thought it was gonna be enough because it's so much fabric, but I do want a little bit more fullness. And for your viewing pleasure, a tiny pop of color.
One does want a hint of color.
This is silk habitai I dyed using acid dyes. You may recognize it as the same fabric I used for the puffs on the bottom of my Queen of Hearts cosplay. Also opting to do the 18th century magic sleeve construction on this project because I like it. I have a full tutorial on this on my Queen of Hearts video if you'd like a more thorough explanation. Note that if you are going to do this on this particular type of sleeve, make sure that the sleeve head of the lining is opposite that of the fashion fabric, or it'll be backwards when you turn it out, which is what's happening to me here. Doesn't that red look good after staring at all that black? Even Morticia would approve. Now we'll edge finish the cuff. Note that this should be sewn with hooks and eyes, but I'm going to leave it be for now until I make a camicia so that if I have to adjust the width of it, I can when I have the sleeves done. Here's the finished cuff edge. I left the bottom loose because I have a feeling I'm going to have to shorten the sleeve. Match the seams of the sleeve to the baragoni. Then I use the snaps as a guide to mark where I want my button loops. I've got 5 snaps, so I'll do 5 loops equidistant between the snaps. I opted to use some nylon beading cord for my button loops. Measure down and around your button and add a little seam allowance. You can choose to put the buttons on the sleeve or the bodice, but I'm opting for the sleeve to reduce bulk if I decide to wear this with only the short sleeve. Note that I love that you can leave the underarms loose in this era for added movement and comfort. It's hot in Italy, y'all. Finally, the hem. Adding padding to the bottom helps hold the skirt out and give it weight, which makes it easier to walk in graveyards. First, pin the padding to the wrong side of the fabric. You want to lap the edge 1/4 of an inch over the seam line so when you sew you get a double layer right around the seam. Then pin the facing on the right side and sew. You'll then turn under everything to the wrong side and stitch up the facing by hand. A brunette, a blonde, and a redhead were running from ye old Venetian Inquisition. Nobody expects it! They reach a farm and decide to hide. The brunette hides in the cow pasture. The redhead hides in the pig pen. The blonde hides in the potato field. The Inquisition runs into the cow pasture, and all they hear is, moo, moo. So they move on. The Inquisition runs into the pig pen, and all they hear is, oink, 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 oink. So they move on. The Inquisition runs into the potato field, and all they hear is, potato, 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 potato. And if you've made it this far and want to watch another crazy, silly costuming video like this, you can check out this one here on the screen. Thank you so much for watching, folks. I love y'all, and I'll catch you in my next video.